Thanks for joining us today for first ever Federal Social Media Week. Today is session 4, What's New and Interesting in Podcasting. I'm Gabrielle Perrette. I am Senior Media Advisor for the U.S. General Services Administration and lead for this group, SocialGov, the federal government's social media community of practice. Today we'll be hearing from Tanner Iskra, video producer and host of VA's Borne the Battle podcast. Tanner is going to be talking about what's new in podcasting styles, his philosophy on video and podcasting, the podcast award show landscape, interagency cooperation, and more. Tanner joined the VA in 2018. He is a proud United States Marine Corps veteran who served as an administrator, an intel analyst, and as a combat videographer, photographer. During his military career, he deployed to OIF-3 to spend time in many countries as part of the Black Sea Rotational Force. After leaving active duty, Tanner was a senior post-production editor with NASCAR Productions. Tanner is a graduate of the Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University with a Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communication and Media Studies, and holds a certificate in military motion media from the Newhouse School of Journalism at Syracuse University. Just a quick reminder today that this session is being recorded. Captioning is available and has been sent out in the chat. A link to it has been sent out in the chat box. If you have any technical issues, you can send a chat directly to the Digitalgov team who can help you out with that. We'll be taking some questions at the end, so you can send them right to the chat box. And please remember to take the feedback survey that we send out after the session. So welcome to session 4 of Federal Social Media Week. We have a few fun polls to launch. Digitalgov team, here we go. First poll, you guys chime in with your answers. Does your agency have a podcast? Yes, no, not sure. Let's hear what you have to say.
Good questions. Questions on there.
We got some answers coming in. Second question, if your agency does not have a podcast, is there interest to start one? Yes, no, or not sure? Do you listen to podcasts? Yes or no? And lastly, do you like a video podcast or traditional audio?
I'm going to be very interested in that last one.
What do you prefer? What's your preference, Tanner, video or traditional audio?
I listen to podcasts on long drives. So YouTube is probably not the best option for me while I'm driving across state lines, but or on an interstate. So for me, it's on my phone, on Spotify, while I'm driving or going on long walks.
I'll answer the same way. That's mostly when I listen to a podcast. Well, it used to be on my commute is when I would listen to a podcast, but now that we have no commute, we do listen. My husband and I like to listen to podcasts when we're driving around in the car, if we can find one to agree that we both like.
Yeah. Now, if I am in my living room and I'm on YouTube, I might just go down a podcast hole on YouTube though. So it just depends on the podcaster though too. If it's engaging video, like if it's on Instagram, I'm good, and it's just two guys or just two an interview and a guest like this, and there's no cuts in the video. Yeah, I will just swipe right on through. It does not that does not engage me. If it's going to be a podcast that's a video podcast, I feel that you have to have some production value behind it. Like when I'm talking full screen with the guests talking full screen or a full graphic, but then again, I've seen tens of thousands of views on YouTube videos that just have a graphic up. Or a picture up. We're talking about wrestling podcast. Jim Cornette has an artist that draws the scene that they're talking about, and that's just the graphic that's up, and he gets tens or hundreds of thousands of views on that. So, different strokes for different folks. But personally, for me, it's long drives, and then if I'm in the house and it's a well-produced podcast on YouTube, I'll watch that then.
That's great. Well, let's see. Polling has closed. Does your agency have a podcast? 37% of our audience today said yes, they do. 45% said nope. And 18% were not sure if they had a podcast. Next question was, if your agency does not have a podcast, is there interest to start one? 53% of the audience said, yes, there is. There is some interest. Folks are definitely interested in podcasts. 3% said no, and 44% weren't sure. Third question, do you listen to podcasts? 81% of our audience today said yes, they do. 19% said no. Maybe they'll pick up some interesting podcasts to listen to, and maybe you'll have an opportunity to pick up some more listeners. And last question, do you like a video podcast or traditional audio? So we have 10% that said yes, they like a video podcast. Well, I think actually this question now maybe should have worded a little different. 60% said either was fine.
Okay.
For video.
60%?
Yeah, 60% said either traditional or video.
Very good.
31% said no, they don't like video.
Very good.
So interesting. Okay, let's jump into it. Tell us a little bit about Borne the Battle.
So Borne the Battle's mission, when I got it, when we had the interview with the previous host, he said, what is the Tanner Iskra Borne the Battle going to look like? And I remember I gave some sort of answer, but I remember in my brain, I was like, okay, what is this thing going to look like? What is this thing going to be? How am I going to do this? And I went back to my house that night, and I went back to my military training. I just gave out, okay, what's the mission statement, and what are going to be 5 tenets that fill out that mission statement. So it's to inspire transitioning veterans with positive stories. It's to educate VA employees on the customers that they serve. It's going to be about getting the information from the VA to the veterans as quickly as possible, or as quickly as I can. And there's 2 more. Promoting veteran advocacy initiatives through the voice of veterans. So whatever the veterans want to bring to the table. Mm-hmm. And then overall, just bridging that military and civilian divide. And that's how I choose my guests is looking at those tenets and going, okay, do they serve one or many of these? And if they do, then we bring them on, we have a discussion.
That's great. How long has this podcast been in existence?
Late 2016.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. It was started.
You're approaching 5 years then, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're just crossed 4 going into 5. I'm not the original host. The original host was another Marine by the name of Tim Lawson. He's now with the Department of Education, I believe. But he started this thing, and it was originally called This Week at VA. And I guess he went to some podcast conference, and he went to Paul Salernja, who has a pretty popular veteran podcast community. And he's like, oh, you have VA has a podcast. What's it called? And he's like, This Week at VA. And he's like, that's a terrible name. Change it. It's terrible. That's terrible. And so like Tim walked along this road, this path, and kind of with his head down. And then he just thought of the VA's motto to take care of those who have borne the battle and their widows and their orphans. And that's how.
Borne the Battle is a much improvement. I think that's.
I think so.
I think so. Tell us a little bit about how you market your podcast.
I market based on the tenets of a marketing funnel. So if I can share a screen with you real quick.
Yeah.
Go ahead and share that. Let me know when you can see it. Can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
Here we go.
Going there. How's that? Okay. So the marketing funnel, kind of create awareness, and I try to convert. So that's like your wide approach. Try to get as many people as possible aware of your podcast. And then through your writing, through your social media, through whatever ways you're trying to reach those people, get them to consider and then convert, and then hopefully, consider it, actually hit play, and then convert, actually get subscribes and loyalty, get reviews. And as you'll see, the funnel filters down. So if you know that the ratios between all of these funnel conversions and consideration awareness, say it takes 100 people to get 1 loyalty, 1 person to write a review, or maybe it takes 3 people to be a subscriber. Well then, okay, if it takes 100 people, let me plus that up through different strategies. Maybe I can get 1 million people to look. Then what's that ratio look like, or what's that ratio? So I kind of look at this when I consider on rate of return on investment when I do my marketing. I do it in many different ways. We go through of course social media. So I do Facebook videos. And then I try to create the funnel by creating links, right? So if you click on the blog link here, it'll take you to the blog, and I've converted somebody to actually viewing the blog, and maybe it won't pull up right now. Oh, there it goes. And this is the one that happened. That was this week, and we read the blogs too as well. And then you can actually hit play, you can hit subscribe. So it's basically creating as many funnels as you can through as many different ways, and we do it through social media, through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. That's not the wrong Instagram.
Yeah, that's right, my next question. How do you integrate your podcast with your social strategy?
With links, with smart links. So if you go to Chartable here, you're able to create. If you're able to track your own podcast.
What's Chartable? Tell us
Chartable
for
is like
non-podcast host, what's Chartable?
absolutely. Chartable is a chart tracking website. So you can search for any podcast in here. So we can search for Borne the Battle, and I'm just typing it into Chartable here. And you can scroll down and you can see where it's charting in your category. And you can look at the history, and you can actually click on who your competition is and how you're doing against the competition. And then you also, so like there's the FBI one right there at 28. So right now I'm just going, for those that maybe impaired, I'm looking through the different charts of the government podcast category within Apple Podcasts. So I look at Zero Blog 30. That's a military veteran one. One's Ready is another veteran centric military podcast. So I just look at, what they're doing, what I'm doing, how we're doing. But with the real power about Chartable, I'm going to click over here to a thing on once you claim and track a podcast, you can create smart links based off that podcast. So basically, when you look at my social media and it says, listen here, or there's headphones with a link, it's a smart link. So basically, if I have a Apple device like I have right now, and I click on it, it'll go straight to Apple Podcasts. Right. So, but if you have if you have a PC, or it might take it to Google Podcasts. If you have an Android, it might take it to Spotify. So depending on the device that you click from, will direct the person the quickest way to your podcast. If they just want to click on the listen button.
Or your podcast on YouTube too?
They are. So, right now we're playing, and you saw my studio. We're kind of playing with the studio, but right now we just have graphics up. Remember, I said if I don't see any kind of production value in the cutting of actually seeing the two faces, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do the graphics. So if we're talking about this last episode here, we go into that episode. Oops, that hasn't premiered yet. This one right here. This one's premiered. Okay, so I'm now pulling up one on YouTube here. Now, if you look into the description, it's still important, because then I'm still putting a Chartable link in there. That's a campaign for just YouTube. And then I'm also putting the blog in there so people can go to the blog. So it's all about creating those funnels for people to actually get to the download. It's not just putting it up there, but it's creating a person to get to the next step and actually listen to it.
Are you able to track downloads, number of downloads?
Yes. So I can track downloads in Transistor, but to get to the click part first, because you got to look in the ratios. Like Facebook and Twitter, I created a smart link just for Facebook and Twitter, and it will tell me through the whole campaign how many people click on it.
Kim, and
from there we have
a question in the chat box from Kim wanting to know, how do you create the smart link?
How do you create the smart link? Easy. So you go into Chartable once you track it, and then here I'm going to reshare the screen again. I can actually share it. It takes 2 seconds. So once you're in Chartable and you want to create a smart link, you go over here to Smart Links, click on it, click on New Link, and you can select your podcast, Borne the Battle. You can actually have it go to directly to an episode, or just to the podcast, to the most recent episode. And I normally just do the most recent, and then you can click a custom shortcut. So which different campaign you want to do, and then you can click right here, redirect to iOS to Apple, redirect Mac to Apple Podcasts. You can have them redirect all the Spotify. There's all kinds of options in here. And then you just click Save Smart Link, and then it will populate. I'm just moving in between the screens here on Chartable. You go back to the smart links right here, and then you literally say this is COVID. This is a direct one to COVID update number 7. Maybe that's not the one I clicked on, but it'll pop up right here. That's the partner one's email. So that's when I do my outreach. So I copy the link, paste it in. Bob's your uncle. You're good to go.
That's great. Thanks, Tanner, for
absolutely.
walking us through that. Tell us a little bit about your partnership outreach strategy.
So we have interns from the Department of State virtual internship program, and I wrote a position description to hire some outreach interns. And what they do is they reach out to VSOs, to military blog sites that are private companies. They'll reach out to basically the community that I want to reach out to. That is also in a medium that is also in there, whether it be VSOs, nonprofits, state governments, state veterans, and I know that they have newsletters. I know they have social media. And so what we do every week is we put together a smart link for them, a graphic. We share all of our social media in hyperlinks and write them a quick synopsis. Thank them for being our partner. Send it out, one email, they all get it, and it's up to them whether they use it or not. So some do, some don't. Some use it every week, some use it every other week, some use it when they need content. But either way, they're supporting the podcast in some way by getting their audience exposed to our podcast. So
that's great. And do you do the same similar outreach to other offices at VA, like health and benefits?
we are on the vet resources email. So the vet resources email goes out weekly, and it goes to everybody within VA, and they're directly into their email accounts. And I'll tell you right now, email marketing is the best way to market your podcast. It's the biggest return on an investment.
That's a great tip.
You know, yeah, social media is great for awareness, but as far as getting the conversions, it really comes down to email marketing. It gets right into the person's email, and people don't think like email is kind of old school, right? Like they're like, that's not. I'll tell you right now, people that open their emails, they will click on a link more often than not than they do on social media.
That's true. Google it. There's a lot of research on this. Emails definitely have a higher click rate conversion than social media does. Yeah, that's really interesting. And so what types of newsletters do you all do you outreach to? Is it just VA? And you mentioned the VSOs. Those are veteran service organizations. Do they have email marketing as well? Any creative ways you sneak into people's emails, other people's emails?
We've gotten with Vet Resources, which goes directly to 11 million veteran email accounts. So if you've signed up for service within the VA, which is our target audience, veterans, you will get that email. We're going to be in that email. So we're there, unless you opt out of it, and you can opt out of that. When it comes to the partners, I think, don't quote me, VFW features this sometimes in their emails. And then there's a state, I think California State Veterans Department of Veterans Affairs, they share us in an email. So and then there's another major VSO that I'm not thinking of right now that shares us every week. And then Rally Point, a big huge social media network for veterans in the military community, they put us in what's called their command post every week, and they were up on the top there, which is like their main blog, and everybody sees it. The algorithm is great on that, and it's direct. I mean, it's a social media site that's directly for our community, so it works great.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about your tools of the trade and tell us what's new in technology for podcast?
What's new in tech? I don't know if it's new, but it's new to me because I'm government, right? So
sure.
Yeah, but you remember when I was in my in-laws basement, and I had a basic microphone and I had a rickety desk. And we were just making it happen by throwing a blanket over my head and just recording my monologues. Now they've upgraded my microphones. They've upgraded this arm here. So if I bump a desk, it's not going to bother the mic too bad. So that's great. And then the Rode mixer here, and I don't know if I can show you. If you just Google Rodecaster Pro, it's great. It has 4 different channels for 4 different mics. I can record. Basically, if you were talking right now, I can record the computer's audio. I can have a phone call in like a radio show, and I can even connect a phone via Bluetooth and it also has its own slider. And then it also has little sliders for, queued up. You hit a button and it plays intro music or outro music. But I normally don't use that because I don't normally do much live stuff. It's mostly post recording. But it's a great piece of gear if you're looking to have something within a studio.
What about any video editing software? Like anything new that you're using? Anything interesting?
I don't use it for video editing, but you could, because I use Premiere and I just do that slate. But for 508 compliance, for transcribing your audio, it can also edit your video. It can also record your screen. Is this program called Descript, and I think I sent you a YouTube video that you can put in the chat there. That right there is, I use it for monologues and I use it for transcribing my podcast. It gets me to about 95%, 85%, and then I give it to an intern to clean up. It's a great piece of gear, great piece of software. It transcribes your audio, and then you can actually cut audio like you're cutting text. So if you want to cut the word "the" out or and you hit delete in the text, it'll delete it in the audio. So it's an amazing piece of gear. Highly recommend. However, our firewalls here at VA prevent us from using it online on our work computer. So I go offline and use it, but it's a great piece of gear.
Great,
off
thanks.
the VPN, offline.
You talked a little bit about video and podcasts. Tell us a little more about what your video podcast philosophy. Should people transition to video? Should they stay audio? If they're audio, should they start experimenting?
But I've been asked that question a lot too, and I'll go back to, if it's an engaging video, sure. I don't think you should come off of the platforms like Apple Podcast or Spotify or anything like that. I think you should integrate video into your overall marketing strategy. Get people to click on the blogs, get people to click on, because that's where you want your information. And a lot of our benefits breakdowns, it's mostly go here for more information, and usually it's a wall of text and a blog, and people go and find it, or they listen to the podcast. I really think video is great for marketing as far as social media. I think it's great for, I don't put my full episode up. I just put the interview up of the on and I look at people like Rogan and how they use YouTube and their strategy. They put about 3 or 4 clips every episode up, and then they also have below, they say, this is taken from episode 227. Click here to listen to the full interview, and then it'll take you to Spotify. So I just kind of look and see how other people are marketing it. But again, when it comes to video, I don't think there's any value to, and you see it all the time in a lot of podcasts, just 2 people in a Zoom meeting like this talking, and there's no cutting. There's no, hey, I'm talking now, hey, let's go to a graphic. If you don't have that, I really don't see the value in just the Zoom meeting, personally.
That's great advice, I think. What about, are there other VA podcasts, or is Borne the Battle the only one right now?
There are. We just launched the VA Podcast Network this year. Mm-hmm. And it's a loose, because what I was getting was, I was getting calls from like a local VA medical center in Phoenix, and like, hey, we want to start a podcast. We have this great idea. We want to start a podcast. Great. What is it? So I wrote policy on like, which specific niche do you serve for VA's messaging? Do you agree that you're going to blog your show notes? Because that's so important, because blogging your show notes gets you into the social media marketing, right? So you're able to share that article, share that, and embed. You can embed your player in there. It gets you in the newsletter, it gets you into so many things. So blogging your show notes on your official blog is so important. So we have 8 shows right now that have agreed to do that. We have Vets First, which is a research-based podcast. We have women's focused on women veterans, healthcare for sheroes. It's focused on female veterans and healthcare. Fresh Focus, which is a nutrition-based podcast. There's all kinds of, I like the Vets First, the two researchers that are pig farmers in Iowa, and they talk about how the VA is clearing hepatitis C out of kidneys, so we can do kidney transplants with that were previous. Just they talk about so much research. And then Myrick's short takes on suicide prevention. Of course, suicide prevention is so important in the veteran community. So we have that podcast as well. So we've launched about 6 this year. We had about 2 legacy podcasts that we brought in.
Wow, that's great. That's definitely enough to start a community of practice at VA for podcasts.
That is exactly what we've done. We meet every 2 weeks, and we talk about, we have our own little community practice on Microsoft Teams. And I kind of give them the 10,000-foot view. Hey, we're creating a website, a group website. We're creating a VA Podcast Network site. We're creating each individual show sites, and just go from there. And then we talk about things that we're doing together. What have you learned? What have I learned? And just kind of share that information about once every 2 weeks.
That's terrific. At GSA, we have an internal community of practice for our social media accounts, and it's a great way for us to exchange ideas and get feedback and share lessons learned and tips and advice and how to get things done across the agency. I know a few other agencies have that as well. Community of practice is a great resource.
And coordinate and coordinate unity
absolutely.
of effort. So if you got something that's like, hey, that is actually Suicide Prevention Month. What are we doing together, and how can we promote each other within the community as well? Yeah, and we're actually creating our own monthly newsletter for that as well. So
that's great.
Delivery, we're going to be able to push out. If you sign up for the VA Podcast Network newsletter, you'll be able to get what happened last month in the VA podcast community.
Wow, that's great integration with email marketing. Can you tell us a little bit about the podcast award show landscape? What goes on with podcast awards?
Yes. So there's two. So there were three. Now it's two, or there was two. It's continuously shifting, right? So iHeartRadio had its own award show, and that was kind of like known as the main award show. However, there hasn't been a main one that established itself, because iHeartRadio had it for about 2 years, and then they kind of went away, and then they kind of got together with another one. And I'll share my screen again real quick. I think I would rather just show you. Podcast People's Choice Awards has been around for 15 years, like it says. And they are the longest running award show, and they focus on smaller independent podcasts. They did have a governing organization. We were nominated this year, but they're doing away with this category, and they said they're going to come back with like a branded podcast category. They're a great one to submit to. A gentleman's great who runs it. And then there is, I look back at the one that I just submitted to, the Podcast Academy. So this one is like the Academy. This one just came up this year. iHeartRadio, Wondery, Stitcher, Spotify, Libsyn. They're all in on this one. It's brand new this year. It's going to be like the Academy of Podcasting. It has membership dues of about $100. So in that, you do get some webinars, online events, networking. So I invest in my own education, paid the $100, and I'm getting my office to pay for what they're calling the Ambies, and it's the first one this year, and they have about 17 different categories, 24 different categories, and then we're going to enter in about 2 or 3 of those. So that's kind of the latest in the award landscape.
Tell us what's new and trendy in podcasting right now. The podcast styles. What do you think?
I think overall, when it comes to the overall podcast community, I think you're seeing a lot of them. Like, it's with Rogan, kind of changed the game when he got the $100 million to just be on Spotify, and he showed that the little guy can make it, because he was independent like 15 years ago and really just worked at, or 10 years ago and just really worked at it. I think that's harder to do nowadays, because with podcasts, it's so diluted now. There's so many podcasts out there. If you don't have a brand behind you, you don't have a community already built in behind you, it's going to be really hard to just start a community from zero and then make it a thing. I think you really need to have like an agency or just basically a community base that you can start that awareness campaign. Basically I think that's the big change in the podcast landscape, is going to be just the little guys, unfortunately, not going to be, there like it was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Tanner. We have some really interesting questions come in from the chat box. We have a great question that came in from Brian Stone. He's asking, how receptive was your agency in the early days to having a podcast? I know you're the second host of this, but I'm hoping you'll be able to answer a little bit about this. What are the internal challenges you faced? How do you navigate them? Do you still face challenges with the podcast? How do you get things done?
I did this year. I had a very big challenge this year. To get to the first part of the question, I think Tim was just like, I'm going to make a podcast, because he had podcast experience before that. He'd been podcasting since 2014. I think he came in 2015, 2016. He's like, guys, I'm starting a podcast, because he had another podcast called The Veteran Empire. And they said, we don't know anything about this. Knock yourself out. And he just kind of did it, and since then, when it was taken over for me, when I took over for it, I incorporated a lot of my marketing strategy behind it. And so that's kind of the biggest challenge was this year was like endorsement and making sure you have that fine line of not endorsing anybody. So real quick story. We had a director on another podcast for a film that came out, and then we had 2 gentlemen that survived the battle that movie depicted. And so I was going to have the 2 gentlemen on the podcast on Borne the Battle that survived the battle that was depicted in the film. And immediately leadership took it to legal. And legal said, you can't do that. So I was like, oh man, because you got a whole workflow when you have so many irons when it comes to content marketing and actually creating the podcast. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I might not have a show this week. What's going to happen? So went to legal, ironed it out, and we made it work. I threw in another guest real quick, and said, when can I do this? So we got a disclaimer from legal, and I run through my interviews through general counsel every week. If it's a guest that's external to the VA, I run it through legal. I just send them a private YouTube link that they can view, and then they review it, and they give me feedback within a day or two.
This is always my advice too. Make friends with your attorneys and loop them in up front, because that's how you get stuff done.
Yes. And he's enjoyed the podcast. So like, it's great when he enjoys the product, because he's like, oh, this is great. But no, it's about a 2-day turnaround. And, I found out that he liked X-Files. So I got Jennifer Marshall, who's a private investigator on paranormal and on a CW show that's a Navy veteran. And he loved that episode. So it was great establishing that rapport with him. And so that was the biggest challenge this year was getting through legal and making like establishing that process. Uh-oh. I think we're frozen. Hello? Okay, can you guys?
It does look like Gabby is frozen, but you're coming through very well. If you want to either share your screen, or if now would be a good time for Mira to share the Instagram video, or whatever works.
I can answer this question right here from, is it Nilsey? Do you use a specific distributor like Anchor or Spreaker, or do you hold your own accounts on a different platform? And I will share this right here. I'll share the screen. I go through a podcast hosting site called Anchor. What I like about Anchor is they give you average downloads from the 7-day, 30-day, and 60-day and 90-day. And what's important about that is, I was trying to understand what measures success in my podcasting career, right? Was it downloads? Is it engagement? And so when it comes to downloads, I was like, I really want to gauge. And this article here is from thepodcasthost.com. And they got their data from the Feed, which is Libsyn's official podcast. And Libsyn is one of the biggest podcast hosting site, is the biggest podcast hosting site. But they say if you average more than 3,200 downloads, you're in the top 10% of podcasts. If you average more than 1,100 downloads, you're in the top 20% of podcasts. And so I kind of took that and I kind of used this average downloads per episode as a metric to where we're currently at. The subscribers is notoriously not accurate, because podcast directories like Apple Podcasts or Spotify notoriously don't tell you how many subscribers, how many have hit the subscribe button. They don't tell you. And this estimation here is just based on the first 24 hours of downloads of your last 3 podcasts. So I don't see that as very accurate, but I do like the average downloads per episode. And of course, you get all the other analytics: monthly downloads, episode downloads, which players are activating your podcast. So Apple Podcasts accounts for 80% of probably my downloads, and then which countries, which states they're coming from. That's all basic from every other podcast directory, but I use Transistor, and what I like about Transistor is we have an unlimited number of shows in our contract, so we can continue to create shows, and then it goes by downloads per month is the contract. So that's the one we use right now. I hope that answered your question, Nilsey. And then I did see a question in here. It was like, what videos I see? You do have videos. How do you play videos? What do they look like on social media? So Gabby F, if you want to, or Mara, if you want to pull that one up on Instagram, we can hit play on that one.
Sure, I'm gonna go ahead and tee that up right now.
Okay, I'm gonna stop that. I'm gonna stop my screen record, and then she's gonna pull up an example of an Instagram post that I would put on DEPT Vet Affairs. We do about once a week. We also do a video on Twitter, a video on Facebook once a week. And it's just to create that awareness, because I know those are large bases. Do you think that, and Nilsey, do you think that that podcast can be available on any platform? Can they be available or focusing on one? Oh, here we go.
Really, really impactful poem that I'm glad you sent that to me. I had a journalism instructor once tell me that your story needs to be able to stop the person who is chopping celery while cooking dinner and pay attention. Mm-hmm. And your poem definitely made me stop from chopping my celery.
I wrote it. It's true. It's just a story that came out in a way I did not expect. I wasn't a poet before I wrote it. But
that was your first poem?
That was the first poem, yes. And like I said,
wow.
It was supposed to be a suicide letter, but apparently I was supposed to still be here. And that's what came out. And so I was just like, I just wrote it. I hadn't really been able to talk to anyone about it before. And so I don't know if it was just me listening to the music at that moment that inspired it the way that it came out. But it really opened up that door for me to be able to express myself, which is what I needed at that time.
So, and I saw that question that it kind of spread through, and they said, how do you use video for social media? And that's exactly how we do. We just find some kind of nugget that is impactful, and we put it every week on social media. Christina Bolaine, how do you handle captions and transcriptions? I use Descript. I put the interview in Descript. I get about an 85% shooting solution, and then I pass it off to an intern to finish it off. And then we put it in and then once we have the finished transcription back, we put it in our blog on blogs.va.gov of that episode. So click here to read the transcription. That fills out the 508 compliance. That gives a person an ability to read the podcast episode. If our agency is interested.
Hey there, Tanner. It's Gabby. I'm back.
Gabby!
I'm sorry. My power in my house went out and I had to scramble to get my phone hotspotting. So I can read you some questions if you like. I'll jump back in.
Absolutely. I was doing my best. I was just kind of seeing what people were putting out there. And
that's great.
Can you share a link to that? No worries. We put the Instagram post. So Eric said,
share the link to the Instagram post. That's great.
Yeah, at DEPT Vet Affairs, Twitter, Instagram, and then U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs on Facebook. You'll be able to find all that stuff.
We got a question here from Jim. What are your thoughts on episode length? It's a great question.
Episode length. So, I've heard a lot of different opinions on this, and I've seen a lot of successes with different ones. So I personally believe content's king. If you think it's interesting, you think that your audience is going to be interested in it, run it. I've had episodes go 45 minutes. I've had episodes go, I think, over 2 hours at one point. It just depends on the story that's being told. I've heard that, your average episode should be between 20 and 40 minutes or whatever. But then I see someone like Dan's Hardcore History, Dan's Hardcore History, if you look it up. He breaks every rule in the podcasting rule book, right? So like he'll post infrequently. He'll post 6 episodes that are 6 hours long, and it's one of the most downloaded podcasts of all time. So, I look at that, and then
Stephen Colbert recommended that. I remember that episode. My husband and I listened to that podcast too. It's pretty funny, I think. But you're right. He does. He breaks every rule. It's like you don't know when content is coming. The episodes are all different length, but he has a lot of listeners.
And they smash every time they come out. And so you look at that, and then you look at Rogan, who does every day an hour is not enough for him. He always does like 3-hour podcasts, interviews, and then he'll make like 10 different clips out of it, So I think content dictates. If it's a good conversation, if you're doing an interview podcast and it's a good conversation and you think it's interesting, keep it in there. That's the great part about podcasting, is that there's no formatted length.
That's great. I have a question here from Houston. If your agency is interested in starting a podcast, where do you start? I bet you get this one.
Okay.
I field questions for you. Looking for folks who need to know how to start.
That is a really good question. So, because I get questions all the time from anywhere. The VA is like, it's huge. So, where do we begin? Hopefully your agency has a governance or policy on social media, your social media policy, or, your digital media engagement director of your agency, whoever that person is. That's usually the person that directs social media and external content. Get with them and see if there's a policy that is on podcasting. And if not, maybe you can help write one. I hope that answers your question. Gabby, I think you've muted.
Sorry, there you go. Sorry, tab management.
Okay, no worries. No worries.
Let's see. We have
COVID challenges.
More COVID. Tell us a little bit. We have a question that came in from Ashley. Stop me if you already answered this, but what sort of clearance approval processes are required for each of your podcasts?
So mainly just the legal one, you know. That's really the only one. We have a disclaimer. We have a legal process. We submit it. That's all that's it. So I choose my own guests. I'm very strong in voicing that opinion that I'm not going to be. I'm a veteran. I know that community, and many of my leadership are veterans as well. But they if I'm being dictated to, I'm not going to feel comfortable. So, you know, I'm just going to not do it. You know, so I'll just, you know, I was hired on as a video producer. That was my PD. So
how do you find guests? How do you find people? How do you find those stories?
Oh man, I get hit up on email. I get hit up on LinkedIn. We're at a point now where we don't look for guests. They find us, and it's LinkedIn. It's my email. You know, because we have a show email. You know, if you want to email us, you can email us at podcast@va.gov. So I get requests in from there. You know, I do also have a production coordinator that's an intern. She handles my schedule. If I want to reach out to somebody, which sometimes I do still, I will send them that calendar link, or I'll make a pitch to them. Once that's established, then I'll send them a calendar link to book a time to be on the podcast. And with COVID, I've done more interviews remotely than I ever have before. So we use a thing called Zencastr.com. No E, Zencastr, but the caster doesn't have an E in it. There's also Squadcast.fm, which also has a video element to that as well. And it's basically just sending them a link, putting them in a chat room, and you just hitting record.
That's great. Thanks. Let's have one last question and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Give us some interview tips. How do you come up with great questions?
So I get the bios and I get the headshots from my production coordinator about 2 weeks ahead of time. And I normally only have enough time to just do the prep about a day before. But I read the bios and I think about my tenants and I think about, you know, just interesting ways, you know, basically read their bios and just be attentive in the interview, like understand what they're saying. And if there's a follow-up question that needs to happen on the fly, be open to that. Don't just stick to the interview questions that you have. Be attentive to your audience and be attentive to the guest, and know when to ask a follow-up question if it's warranted.
That's great. Thanks so much. Now,
people loose. Be so loose. Like everybody's so like stiff and especially in government. I mean, oh my gosh, like you know, it's almost like they're testifying right in front of a Congress, and it's like, no, just who are you? Like
I think your podcast is so successful too because your content and your interviews feel so organic. When you're talking to people, it doesn't feel scripted. Their responses feel natural and organic. I think.
You know, guests ask me, they're like, "Can I get a list of the questions?" I go, "No." You can get topics. I would love to discuss because I think it's in their best interest too. You know, you don't want to make them come off rehearsed and wooden and stilted. Yeah. People can pick up on that. You know, they can just pick up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people need to get in touch with you, how do they reach out to you, Tanner?
If they want to reach the show, they can reach us out. They can email us at podcast@va.gov. And then they can also find me on LinkedIn, Tanner Iskra. You know, I'd be happy to help and answer any questions about podcasts anybody might have.
That's great. Thanks. We chatted out. That email again was podcast@va.gov, and find Tanner on LinkedIn. He shares all his episodes too. So it's a nice way to get an update when there's a new episode.
Absolutely. And then Borne the Battle. Some people are asking what the name of the podcast is. Borne the Battle with an E.
Borne the Battle with an E. That's great. So thanks everyone for joining us.